Morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us. We will begin with chapter 18, verse 1. So really what we'll begin with this morning is a very basic question to ask at the beginning of this parsha, which is what exactly is the timeline here? Just to think through a few events that we know occurred. Last week's parsha, we had the splitting of the sea. We had Amalek, the battle between Klal Yisrael and Amalek. We had my father's bar mitzvah, but that was a different time, but that was last week's parsha, okay? We also, then we go on in this week's parsha to Yisro's reunion with Moshe, Yisro's advice about the judicial system and the giving of the Torah. To focus on this week's parsha, where is Yisro's reunion with Moshe in the timeline? Now, if we assume that everything in the Torah is written in order, it's obvious. It's obvious that there was the splitting of the sea, followed by the war with Amalek, followed by Yisro coming to be with the Jewish people, followed by the giving of the Torah. But as we know, there's a very famous idea, ein mukdam u'muchar b'Torah, that you can't assume that the Torah is written in chronological order. So we're going to see a little bit of a longer piece than we normally do. We're going to look at the Ramban on Pasuk Aleph, and it's a little bit of like many things when you really analyze things in Torah, it's a little bit of piecing together the clues to try to figure out what's going on. Ramban on Pasuk Aleph. There's a famous dispute regarding this section. There are those who say that Yisro came to interact with Moshe before the giving of the Torah, as the sequence relayed in the Chumash. And there are those who say that no, Yisro came after the giving of the Torah. To assume that Yisro came after the Torah was given is strongly supported by the written word here. Sha'amar vayavo Yisro chosein Moshe uvanav vishto el Moshe el hamidbar asher hu choneh sham haru Elokim. Says Yisro, Moshe's father-in-law, and Moshe's children and Moshe's wife came to Moshe to the desert that he was camped there, the mountain of God. What made this the mountain of God? What made it the mountain of God, of course, was the fact that the Torah was given there. But there was no earlier event that made it the mountain of God. So the fact that it's even being referred to as the mountain of God implies that that remarkable event has already occurred. Shechanu sham shana achas, v'zeh tamasher huchona sham. Sorry, he says it slightly differently. Excuse me, not slightly differently. He says it differently. He says that why do you think they were there in the first place? It must be they were there because they had already received the Torah. V'od she'amar v'hodatis chukehu elukim v'torosav she'eman asunim lo b'har Sinai. Moshe Rabbeinu, when he describes what he does to Yisro, he says, I teach them the laws of God and his Torah. Well, doesn't that imply that the Torah had been given already? That's a pretty good one. V'od. Ikana amar vayishlach Moshe es chosno vayilech lo al artzo vayazeh b'shana hashniya b'nasa me'ar Sinai k'moshe amar parshas Ba'aloscha vayom Moshe lechovav ben Ruel midyonicho say Moshe nosim anachnu v'sham kasu vayom reilav lo elech kimal artzi v'el maratzi elech. Another thing, in the end of this story here, Moshe, kind of parts ways with Yisro, and the Ramban points out that we see in Sefer Bamidbar that when Moshe parts ways with Yisro, that's in year 2 of the Jewish people stay in the desert, which means that this whole exchange occurred after the giving of the Torah. Rav lochem sheves baharazeh pnu usa'u lochem. In Sefer Dvarim, when Moshe is recounting the events of the Jewish people in the desert, Moshe says that Hashem spoke to us at Chorev. We've spent a long time on this mountain. V'sham nemar v'omar alechem bo'esahi lemor lo uchal levadi seiseschem v'ekachas roshei sheptechem arashim chachamim. So in that context, Moshe Rabbeinu says, and I told you I can't be your sole judge anymore. So after Moshe Rabbeinu says in Dvarim, his review of events, he says, so we left Har Sinai. So then he says, and I told you I can't be your judge anymore. Who's the one who gave Moshe the idea that he shouldn't be the sole judge? Yitro at the beginning of this parsha, which if you kind of put it all together, that makes it sound like Yitro came after the giving of the Torah. So the Ramban says it seems for all of these reasons, it would seem that Yitro came after the giving of the Torah. But then the obvious question to ask is, Vim Kain, Nistorich Tam, Lama Makdama Parsha Zos, the cause for Bekan. Fine, we don't have to assume that everything in the Torah is written in chronological order, but presumably there's a reason why it's written in the order that's written in. So the Ramban says you have to ask yourself, if this is not chronological order, why is this story with Yisro inserted here? It should come after the Torah is given. The Amar of Avram, Ki Hayazeh Bavur Dvar Amalek, Kekesher Hiskir, Harash Asimanu Amalek, Vitziva Shenigmaleu Kiraso, Hiskir Asalana Yisro Tova, La Rosenu Shen Lo Gmul Tov, Shanaval Hachris Amalek, Bitsuva Alenu, Shenizar B'vnei Akenia Omdim Imam, Velo Nosifam Imam. So the Ibn Ezra gives a very practical answer to why the story of Yisro is juxtaposed. We had a mitzvah at the end of last week's parsha to annihilate the nation of Amalek. Why do we have the mitzvah to annihilate the nation of Amalek? Because the way they treated us after we left Egypt. We are specifically juxtaposing Amalek's treatment of the Jewish people and encounter with the Jewish people with Yisro's encounter with the Jewish people. That Yisro was very positive for us. Yisro even gave us positive advice. And therefore, the Torah is clarifying there is a mitzvah to annihilate Amalek, but not the descendants of Yisro. There was a time where they lived in a similar area. And so therefore, it's an important distinction to be made. That's the Ibn Ezra's pshat. So he says this is out of chronological order, but it's written at the beginning of this parsha. It should be juxtaposed to Amalek, so we see a clear distinction, not only just to contrast personalities, but actually to clarify the instruction for later. Vim kol zeh ani shoel al adas hazu k'shamar hakasuv vayishma Yisro kol asher aso Hashem l'Moshe Yisrael amo ki otzi Hashem es Yisrael mitzrayim v'lo malo amar sheshama masha asa l'Moshe Yisrael b'matan haTorah shu be'anaflos hakadolos shenasu lahem. The only problem is we've got a new problem. We've got a new confusion. It says Yisro heard all the great things that God did for Israel by taking them out of Egypt. That's great that God took them out of Egypt. But if Yisro came after the giving of the Torah, there's a glaring omission from what he heard. Why don't we talk about that he heard about the remarkable scene of the giving of the Torah? The fact that that's not on his list implies that Yisro came before the giving of the Torah. Skipping a few lines. Alo dos Yisrael is kolat lo Hashem matzaavsam baderech v'yomer Yisro mizeh atoyodat k'lo Hashem lo melo siper lo ma'amad har Sinai. It's not only the pasuk talks about what Yisro heard when he, upon his, that caused him to come, but it says in the pasuk that Moshe told Yisro about things, and it also doesn't have Moshe telling Yisro about the giving of the Torah. Okay, v'ulai nomer, skipping a couple lines. V'ulai nomer sheshama Yisro ba'artzo miyad. Ki otzi Hashem Mitzrayim, v'nasa me'artzo v'giya Moshe achrei Yoso chona bar Sinai achar matan Torah v'lo siper sheiskalo inyan amamarahu ki hadavar otenu karov odam sham u'biyadua ki sofer lo. So the Ramban says we can have a practical answer. The reason why it doesn't say Yisro heard about the giving of the Torah is it could be Yisro left his land immediately upon the Jewish people leaving Egypt. So he actually had not heard about the giving of the Torah because he was already en route by the time the Torah was given. So that's why I wouldn't have said Yisro heard about it. And the reason it wouldn't say that Moshe told him about it is it's obvious Moshe told him about it. It's what happened last week. They're at this place of Har Sinai. It's a place of things going on, of things happening. And so therefore it's self-evident that Moshe told Yisro about that. The Torah says not only did Moshe tell Yisro about the giving of the Torah, told Yisro about earlier experiences like the Exodus. That's what you could say. But the Ramban says what I really think the pshat is, V'akarve lai lispos seder haTorah sheba kodem matan Torah b'yosem b'refidim Moshe Amar b'mechilta Rabbi Yeshua Omer Mechames Amalek Shama Va Shiksuva B'tzido V'nasa Imoya Merfidim Al Har Sinai. The Ramban says I actually think the real pshat is that this is written in order, and that Yisro came immediately after the war with Amalek, and he came with them to Har Sinai. V'akasav she'amar el hamidbar asher chonesh shamar elokim inyano ki hayar Sinai b'derech midyan karov misham. In other words, the Ramban's question had assumed that it must be that Yisro came to Har Sinai in the long stay they had afterwards. He said, not necessarily. It could be that it was close by. Okay. Vine Yisro yatsa im bito v'abonim mimidyan ubo el Har Sinai. Okay, so that's his second point. Skipping about another 10 lines. V'hine yeh perish hakasuv v'yavo Yisro chosein Moshe v'no v'ishto Moshe l'midbar asher hu chonesh sham v'yavo el har elokim ki al har ba v'sham amad v'ukamos she'amar v'yavo el har elokim foreva. Basically, they got to that spot, and that spot would become very important with the giving of the Torah. Okay. So this is, the Ramban actually goes on after this, but I don't want to take more time. But this is a very interesting question. As is evident from this Ramban, we'll see different ideas from Mefarshim as the sequence of things. But basically, just to review, the tension is Moshe's telling Yisro about his teaching the Torah, and the other difficulty is that why is the story of Har Sinai not something that Yisro heard, not something that Moshe told him? And the Ramban still feels we can understand the Torah speaking in chronological order. Okay, let's just very briefly, just really to prepare more for tomorrow, go to verse 11, chapter 18, verse 11. Yisro is speaking to Moshe, and he says, I now know that God is greater than all other gods, all other deities. It's really a hard phrase to translate because of the matter that they did to them, sinned against them. What about the matter that they sinned against them? It's an obvious question. We'll just see Rashi today, and we'll leave the rest for tomorrow, God willing. If you look at Rashi, it's the third Rashi on Pasuk Yud Aleph. Kiva davar asher sadu aleihem kitargumos. So Rashi cites the Targum, who says that, then Rashi explains that the Egyptians tried to make the Jews' life difficult with water. The Egyptians tried to destroy the Jews with water. The famous idea that the babies were thrown into the water, and so now they're destroyed with the water. With the splitting of the sea, the Egyptian soldiers drowned there. So this shows that God answers measure for measure, and that's very inspiring in the eyes of Yisro. We will speak more about this tomorrow, God willing. We really spent most of our time this morning talking about the sequence of events, and now we just discussed this last pasuk, verse 11. What's the significance of the thing that they sinned with?